AI to Go podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the AI to Go podcast. My name is Johannes and we help you turn AI pilots into clear business outcomes. Today's guest is Julien Roux, co-founder of the AI analytics platform Nebuly. Welcome, Julien.
Thank you so much for having me, Johannes.
It's a pleasure. I'm so excited for our chat today. We'll cover everything around what Google Analytics in the AI age look like. So I'm really excited.
Likewise.
Before we do that, I want to get to know you a little bit better on the personal side. I saw that you grew up in Osterwelle on the French-Swiss-Italian border, right in the shadow of Mont Blanc and the Matterhorn. When was the last time you were on a mountain, and do you think differently at 4,000 meters?
You've been doing your research. So that's been a long time since I've been kind of seriously climbing. It's one of my biggest passions, but building a startup is just as demanding, so not as much time for climbing. It's also not a place known for technology, to be honest. People come typically for breaks, winter skiing, summer hiking. I guess if Nebuly scales up, will end up being one of the first kind of validated sort of startups, globally relevant startups ever. My co-founders are from the same spot as well, incidentally. Like we went to high school together. So that's quite unique.
You speak Italian, French, Swiss, and I also learned you speak some German. When you're in a heated meeting, what's the language you think in and what's the language you curse in?
It's a really hard question. So my wife is Australian. So like English has become my second language. And I think my brain is 50% English, 50% Italian, depending on the moment, both in meetings and dreamings. And it's just, a little bit of a mix. But Italian is a great language to curse. I have to say, we have a lot of different ways to do that.
Not only cursing or the gestures, right?
Yeah.
Very, very elaborate and detailed in Italian versus in other European cultures.
That's right.
You went from mechanical engineering to finance at Exor. Exor, for everyone, is the holding company of the Agnelli family. And they have assets like Ferrari, Stellantis, so really big companies across different sectors. And you were analyzing public market investments. What are your takeaways from almost 6 years in finance? And what are some of the common threads how engineers and investors think?
First of all, I have to say it's been a great experience. It's a fairly small company in terms of headcount. It was only like 20, 25 people when I joined the company. So I felt like pretty grateful to be part of that story. And what kind of got me into investments is the fact that I always love to understand how things work. So, back in school, it was, how an engine works. And then at some point, I started thinking, how does a company work? How does a sector like the aerospace sector works? And the beauty of being an investor in a way is that you're effectively being paid to understand dynamics before somebody else does. And then you have to put your assumptions to test, basically. And so to some extent, it's something that's sort of similar also to what a startup is about. Like you need to kind of come up with a thesis and then work hard to kind of make sure that the thesis is the correct one, basically. As an investor, you have fewer ways to influence that. So it's more about the first part of the process, coming up with the thesis. As a startup, it's more the second part of the process. But I think in terms of like similarities in both cases, you really need to stick your neck out and kind of, have a clear idea about what you believe in and what you think is going to happen. And I think that's what I really liked about it. The fact that we were able to kind of think over the medium to long term. As you mentioned, it's a family-owned business. And so it was not maximizing for the next quarter. It was thinking about the next 5 to 10 years. And then you kind of have the opportunity to think about what's really going to shape the market. And you can move ahead of other people.
Makes sense. You went from Exor, where people say things like alpha generation and risk-adjusted returns, to AI, where people say things like hallucinations, prompt injection, etc. Which industry has the worst jargon?
I think it's both, to be. I mean, finance is, it's pretty bad. Like as you kind of get in the sector, like I think it's gonna take you a few months to get used to the jargon. It's very, very specific. I have to say AI is not much different. And we're coming up with new terms like every day now. It's the forward deployed engineer. What the hell does that mean to somebody who's not like working in AI? Like it doesn't mean anything. Forward deployed engineer. And I guess you do get used to it after a little bit.
Yeah. You come from finance where nonsense gets punished by the market. Now I saw all kinds of devices like toothbrushes marketed as AI enabled. At what point do you think we lost the plot, and is there any hope of finding it again?
I was a kid back then, so I don't have direct kind of memories of that time, but the dot-com bubble, like when companies were adding .com to their names, and all of a sudden they were, on paper, 10 times more valuable. It feels like we're going through something similar now. It's AI everything. To your point, like an AI-powered toothbrush. And what people don't realize is, I have to say, is the fact that AI has been with us for a long time. Machines have been having some sort of decisional power for decades now. And we only starting to realize now that we can do complex things for sure, but I think a lot of it has to do with marketing, to your point, as in people getting access to some of these solutions. Obviously, ChatGPT first of them. And once it becomes cool, then everybody's gonna, somehow jump on the winner's trajectory and then say they were an AI company. Funny thing is, I've been exposed to AI for much longer because our single biggest investment back in Exer, it was a company, a UK-based company called Ocado. If you don't know Ocado, you guys should check it out because it's, I think, the coolest groceries in the world. So those guys have come up with basically like a robotic system. Think about a big warehouse with a lot of little robots moving and picking up like the goods and then delivering it to your house. And that was like really like AI powered, as in like these robots move on the grid in a completely like autonomous fashion. And our investment thesis back then was that would be like the most efficient way to kind of serve groceries at home. And it's a mix of AI and kind of robotics, which by the way is one of the hottest topics now, the physical AI word. Maybe we can talk about it later, but that's been brewing for some time. I think the kind of topical moment has been like ChatGPT November 2022. After that, people have started to kind of talk about AI instead of talking about the benefits that AI bring. And I think at some point we kind of go back to talking about the benefits instead of talking about the technology. People are not talking about websites anymore. People are not talking about phones anymore. We're talking about what you can do with technology. Maybe it's going to take a few years, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get there.
Absolutely. You talked about AI isn't like fire and forget, it's launch and learn. I like that soundbite. Let's unpack that a little bit. Why do so many companies still treat AI like traditional software? You build it, you ship it, and then you can walk away, essentially. What is the mistake that many people, many companies are doing?
So let's just talk a little bit about, the kind of context here. I think the context is a word where for like the past 20, 30 years, we've been used to having IT projects that had a clear start and a clear end, as in like the software is shipped and then we just need to maintain it and it's up and running and it doesn't change fundamentally. Like you can run the same application on your servers for like 20 years. Where AI is fundamentally different is the fact that that software is not static anymore. It's dynamic, as in like you can interact with that piece of software in a lot of different ways. And there is going to be some variability in terms of the answers you're going to get, both because of maybe different ways of asking the question, so different prompts, but also because of the model itself drifting over time and so on and so forth. And so like if I put myself in the shoes of a budget owner at any company, it would be very tempting to hope that AI is, launch and forget project. Because first of all, that's what we've been used to for the past 20 years. And second of all, it's because it's creating certainty in terms of budget, resource allocation, and so on and so forth. But that's not the case. So I think that's where a kind of disconnect is coming from. And it's one of the disconnect we want to solve as a company. we think that there is a huge amount of value to be unlocked in understanding how people are using AI solutions after they shipped. And then based on their behavior and their feedback and so on and so forth, keep optimizing the solution so it starts delivering real value. So this is precisely the reason why I think Nebuly was started, to be honest, because technology is fundamentally different versus traditional software, as it's a living product versus like a static application that's shipped and forgotten about.
Absolutely. When did you go from AI is an interesting technology to I need to build a company around this? Was there a specific moment for you?
So I have to confess, I'm a pretty, I'm technology obsessed. I'm not a nerd. I've been guilty of that ever since I was a kid. So, I've been reading like stuff for years, even when I was in the investment world. But I was lucky enough that two of my co-founders, they were like not just investing in AI-backed companies like Ocado was back then, but like working in AI already back then. So my co-founder, the CTO, was working for a Swiss AI research company called Giotto Labs. And my second co-founder he was basically at IBM leading a team of AI development. And so we had a bit of different perspectives because it was coming more from like an investment perspective and they were kind of in the trenches. But it was very clear to us that something was happening. And this was back in 2021 when we started talking about kind of creating something. It was obvious that the amount of papers being published on kind of deep learning and we didn't call them LLMs yet back then. It was kind of deep learning models was on the rise. Honestly, ever since Attention is All You Need came out in 2017, it's been exploding. And it was very clear something was bound to happen. GPT-3 was already out and then people had already like started testing it, but it was only available to a bunch of people in the world. And so that's the moment when we started to think, hey, something is going to happen. We didn't know exactly yet what would be because it was early days, but it was clear something was going to happen in the AI sector. And on top of that, on a personal level, this is my second kind of round as a founder. The first one was just out of college. And it didn't really work out for a number of reasons. And so I promised myself that, I'll give it a second try at some point. And when I felt like we had the right team in place and kind of a right team to kind of discuss about, and a lot of things basically came together. That was in 2022.
Amazing. And a lot has happened since. So you started right before the ChatGPT wave came along.
Yeah, probably 6-7 months before that. Yeah, it was early 2022.
Now you're working with a lot of enterprises deploying dozens of internal AI assistants. What kind of gap do you see between what executives think AI will do and what actually happens when employees start using it?
In my experience, executives tend to think a very high level about, tangible dollar-like benefits. It's very unfortunate, but most of the time it kind of boils down to how many headcounts do we save, as opposed to thinking maybe a little bit more about the user experience, as in people are happier because they don't have to follow processes, or the fact that at some point it's going to have creative benefits that are going to drive maybe expansion. So that's what executive thinks. On a kind of user level, what we're seeing, and we actually have access to some of the logs, is that people have started to use these assistants to do all sorts of things. So any task that requires some degree of effort and requires access to information, over time, people have started to do it with AI assistants. And what's quite interesting is that we've been talking with companies that have not yet built their AI assistants and have tried to, let's put it this way, restrict access to external assistant because of whatever privacy reasons. And employees at those companies, they feel very frustrated because there is a big part of their kind of daily routine which is not available on a professional level. So they end up like doing things that they're not supposed to do. For instance, sending information to yourself and then using ChatGPT on the side. And I think companies are realizing a little bit at a time that like asking people not to have an assistant these days, it's a bit like asking people not to have internet. And you wouldn't even think about preventing Google searches. Maybe somebody was thinking it back in 1998, 1999. But, if we kind of give it like maybe a few years, I'm pretty sure 99% of the companies on Earth will converge towards some sort of personalized assistance.
So what's the mindset shift is essentially, I want to control it because I don't really understand it, to I have a better understanding and now I allow more access and empower my people, to, hey, this is a fundamental technology that's going to change how the company operates, right? So how do we transform the business model, the operating systems, etc.?
Yeah, I'd say that there is a couple major pushbacks that we hear from companies that are not yet using AI. And the first one is certainly like around data privacy. It's not safe. And what data is going to go to OpenAI? Who knows what's going to happen? Blah, blah, blah. The second one is associated with, I think, companies being a little bit afraid of the consequences of implementing these technologies, as in people getting unhappy because maybe there is going to be a reduction in workforce at some point. And so, it's kind of paradoxical, but sometimes you're asking people to help you like training AI models, knowing that some of those AI models are going to replace the people that trained it. And in some companies, this is creating some level of, discomfort, let's call it that way, which is totally understandable from a human perspective. And I think, honestly, like in the next few years, it's going to be pretty rocky. As a society, I think we're going to see some significant changes in terms of, unfortunately, some people maybe being displaced from their jobs. In the medium to long term, humanity has always found ways to kind of put our time as a species to better use. So I think that's not a concern, but in the immediate term, I think there might be some, a little bit of, rocky waters.
What can individuals do to kind of be prepared for that future or that rocky phase? And what else can be done in order to smoothen the ride that we are about to have?
I think it really depends on, what walk of life you kind of coming from. I think the kind of people that have it easiest in a way are people that have been in their jobs for years, maybe 10 plus years, and they have real solid experience that can be put to good use, maybe as a sanity check toward the AI-driven applications. The people I feel are more at risk is the youngest generation, people that today are in, high school/college, because what used to be an obvious path, as in like, okay, I go study law and I become a lawyer. I go study engineering and I become a software developer. It's far from obvious it's going to pay off in the next 20 years like it did in the previous century. Because of the fact that it's a bit of a ladder, right? As you start like your career, at the beginning, you're obviously not great at it. You're kind of a junior, you have to learn. But in that specific moment in time, you're like less efficient than AI solution. Less efficient than Cloud AI, so to speak, if you're a developer, less efficient than Harvey if you're a lawyer. So from an enterprise perspective, it doesn't really make sense to have those juniors. But then if you don't have those juniors, the paradox is you're not going to have those seniors in 5 years. It's an interesting dynamic because in a way it's demonstrating the fact that companies can be very short-sighted, pushing for, reducing cost today, basically increasing efficiency today, but without thinking too much about what's going to happen 5 years down the road. I think what all executives can agree on is the fact that we're going to have somebody who's senior enough, and the seniority depends on the task that's going to check what AI has been producing. But then again, if you don't kind of create those juniors and train them up, who's going to be there in 5 years? So I think that's, an open question as a society. And I think this is spanning across geographies and across sectors, to be honest.
I think if you're thinking about traditional career paths, I would agree, right? So younger people who don't have the training yet are at a disadvantage. I think there will be lots of AI simulators, and you will do more case studies in order to train the basics so that you are more operational once you graduate from a university or different educational institutions. So I think there's just much more hands-on training in simulations that you will do at some point in order to be ready for the job market. And then again, I think the younger generation, they are always the quickest to adopt new technology. So if you embrace new technology, you always have a big advantage over the more senior people, because more experienced people, because they are slower in the adoption. So being the one, and I see that a lot of times in our organization now, the young folks understand the new tools like the cursors, the lovables immediately, and they produce significant value to the company that like older folks who are just not that into the technology just can't do, and they don't conceptually even grasp, right? So I think if you embrace new technology, that can also be a significant opportunity as a young folk. And then maybe like the traditional career path is just not the right way to think about it. It's more about like, how do I develop the skills in order to be relevant for the job market? And maybe that's not the corporate career path anymore. Maybe that's
Exactly.
like more entrepreneurial way of thinking that is required in the future.
I think that's what's going to happen. I am very confident that in the kind of medium term, as a species, I mean, like as human beings, we're gonna find like very good ways to put our talents to use, and to learn how to use those efficiently. Like what is a little bit more concerning for me is what's gonna happen in the next 1 to 2 years. Like what's gonna happen to that generation that is, in college right now, and that has, maybe a significant like student loan, and that cannot basically get into like the same jobs as they would have like 2 years ago. That's the kind of mismatch I was thinking about. But things will work out eventually.
Absolutely. In the context of enterprise adoption, I have a spicy take that you shared. You said that 10 to 15% of Gen AI use cases drive 80% of the value. So that sounds very straightforward. Power law distribution. Now, what is your advice to find out if you're building the few use cases that drive the 80% of the impact in terms of prioritization?
Pareto was a genius ahead of time, I guess. The 80-20. And I think that still applies to your point. It's very hard to guess. So I think what companies that have kind of got it right have done is exploring what other businesses have done. So like a lot of benchmarking and having a deep understanding of what are the kind of hidden problems within the company. But even this, it's only going to take you like to let's call it medium degree of confidence that the AI initiative is going to work out. What a lot of our customers have done is 2024 a little bit, much more in 2025, is launching a number of different initiatives in parallel. And they launched them with the mindset that some of them, they're going to fail. It's a little bit like, having a venture portfolio. Not all of them are going to be successful. You're going to identify 1, 2 stars, maybe a couple of decent applications, and the rest of them is going to be shut down. And so like a lot of enterprises are launching many of these applications in parallel, and then observing over like 6 to 12 months what is really, really paying off. And then paying off at the end of the day means adoption, satisfaction from users, and some sort of return on investment. And then you double down on those applications. So one of our customers is one of our biggest customers, Iveco, for instance. They have been launching over the past 3 years, I think, 50 plus different AI agents, basically. And when we talk with them, like it's very clear that in 2026, they're not going to launch another 100. That's not the name of the game. The name of the game is going to be to harvest those 10, 15, 20 agents that are delivering most of the value to the company and to make them as perfect as possible. So I think the short answer is, as much prep as you can do, benchmarking and understanding your business needs, but then you need to kind of put it to test in the real world and be willing to manage the risk, as in shutting down things that don't perform and doubling down on things that do perform.
Let's talk about that second piece. How do I find out if things perform or don't, right? So let's imagine I'm a VP at a big company. We just launched an AI chatbot for 20,000 employees, costs 2 million. Everybody's using it. And now our CEO asks, is this thing working? What can I tell her with traditional analytics, and where does Nebuly come into play?
It's an excellent question. And I think it's going to take a few minutes to really unpack it. So please bear with me. So the status quo with traditional analytics solution would be to measure easy to measure metrics. So how many users, how many prompts. If you want to be a little bit more sophisticated, you can check the session duration. And that's like, starting point. What companies then want to do next is getting a little bit of a sense of whether people are happy or not. Like, maybe they're using it, but are they satisfied? And so what's the next temptation, so to speak, is let's add some sort of feedback mechanism. Most commonly, it's going to be thumbs up, thumbs down. Every now and then you've got like 1 to 5 stars, a pop-up coming up. And what's really interesting here is that this is not AI specific. People hate answering surveys. So the response rate is extremely low, somewhere between 0.1% to 1% in most applications we've seen. Occasionally, we have companies that tell us, hey, we're very lucky. We've got 20% response rates. And I'm like, I wonder, are you guys asking people to give you feedback? Is this like a pilot stage? Is this a small experiment? And most often the answer is, oh yeah, we've got 15 beta users and they've been, tasked to provide feedback. And I'm like, okay, well then you can understand why they're giving you so much feedback. But what's going to happen once you've got 15,000 users and you don't have any idea what those people are doing with it? So the status quo, as I mentioned, it's basically going to be a combination of volume metrics and a little bit of positive, negative feedback. And we think that this is largely missing the point because of a number of reasons. The first one is that I'm going to give you a real example. If you can't get a good answer using an AI system, chances are you're going to follow up. You're going to prompt again. You're going to ask something to the assistant to do it again. And so in a hypothetical case, you'd see volume going up a lot because everybody's asking the same question 5 to 10 times. But it's actually like a horrible sign. It's a sign of the thing not working. So those indicators, I think they obviously decent indicators, and we definitely suggest collecting them, but it's just not enough. What we believe at Nebuly is that there is value in analyzing the content of those conversations. Because we're talking about chat interfaces or voice interfaces. So it's not a click interface like a mobile app or website. You're really typing in something, pressing enter, typing in something, pressing enter, and so on and so forth. So the only way to kind of get the final and definitive answer as to whether people are having a good time, whether this is generating return on investment, is to actually look at those chats. And this can be scary, could feel like Big Brother, but in the big scheme of things, if you position it correctly, as in hey, we're here to make the system better, not to spy on you. We don't have any personal references. There is no personal data, just this anonymized shell that is going to help us understanding what's the task that's been done and whether it was successful. Acceptance is surprisingly good because people, they genuinely want the tool to work, the Gen AI assistant to work, because it's going to make their life easier. And so what do we do in practice is scanning those conversations to kind of pick up signals that indicate that the person was frustrated with the answer. They're repeating the question. They're complaining it doesn't work. So what type of metric we end up being in a position to provide to kind of, higher up in the companies? Volume, of course, but that's just scratching the surface. The second one is an idea of what people use the solution for. So what are the most common tasks? How often they succeed? Because we kind of get an indication of whether they succeed or not by looking at follow-up prompts. And then you can kind of combine those information to come up with an estimate of time savings, for instance. Hey, we've got 100 people that are drafting an email. 80% of those are successful, 20% have to kind of go back and forth 10 times. If you're successful, you save 5 minutes. If you're not, you wasted 1 minute. And you can do this task by task as a weighted kind of sum, and then translate some of those benefits in a dollar value. This many hours equals that many dollars. And so you kind of end up from a black box to a situation where you have a great understanding of volumes, satisfaction, return on investment, and it gives you sort of a good picture. And then it's up to the company to decide whether this is basically worth the initial investment or not. So that's, what we're enabling as a business.
Let's go a bit deeper into that. You call Nebuly the Google Analytics for LLMs. I love that analogy. Very catchy. Now, Google Analytics, as you said, in traditional analytics, tracks clicks, page views, things that happen. Now, with a chatbot, the thing that happens is a conversation. How do you measure the success in an unstructured dialogue, right? And I think you touched upon a few of those already. So if someone asks a chatbot a question, how does Nebuly know if they got a good answer? And what are the key components that you're measuring?
Let me just take a step back and explain why it's fundamentally different. In kind of traditional software, so to speak, and we're talking about websites, we're talking about mobile apps, we're talking about, kind of point and click software, you could get a great understanding of what was going on just by kind of counting the clicks and looking at the sequence. So you're clicking here and then you click in there, and 50% of people are converting and so on and so forth. Counting clicks within an AI application is kind of meaningless. As I mentioned before, you're typing in something, pressing enter, and so on and so forth. So counting the enters is not that useful. What's very useful is analyzing the content of those conversations and thinking about that content from a critical perspective. When I say critical perspective, I mean, if you were an analyst and you were given a transcript, would you come to the conclusion this was a useful chat or not? So that's like the perspective we have at Nebuly. It's a fundamentally different perspective versus what other kind of companies are doing. There is a separate question, which is the model good or not? Is the technology good or not? So maybe we can talk about that, Johannes, in a bit, but we taking a slightly different approach, which is the user happy or not? And to kind of answer that question, what we do basically is looking at three things. The first one is any sort of explicit signal. So the user kind of giving you thumbs down. If they do, that's great. If they click on a link, that's great as well, because it means they found it useful. The second thing is looking at what we call implicit feedback. So implicit means it's hidden in the chat. I guess most of the people, that are going to listen to this podcast at some point have told AI, hey, this is not what I had in mind. You misunderstood me. You're a piece of shit. You don't get it. I tried it. It doesn't work. This is so bad, and so on and so forth. So those comments, that's gold. That's gold because that is the real feedback you're looking for that allows you to understand the previous answer was simply not good enough. And then again, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it's not good enough.
Yeah, got it. So it's from a user's perspective, you assess the quality, right? And there's this, as you mentioned, explicit feedback where people go just off on the chatbot and insult it. And then there's also an implicit feedback, right? So Can you explain a bit more what that entails?
Yeah. So the implicit component really is about understanding the nuances of their conversation. So if people end up saying, hey, okay, this is helpful, but you only answer half of my question. What about this number? That makes it obvious while we're a system and to any human reading those conversations that the previous answer was not enough. And a third thing we do, Johannes, is analyzing the kind of output itself, as in understanding if that answer would be, generally speaking, satisfactory or not. If the chatbot starts saying, hey, I'm sorry, I don't have this number, I cannot help you with this task. You should speak with a human being, I don't have access to that information. All of those signals, they contribute basically to coming up with a unified metric. We call it error rate. So we define error rate as the percentage of messages that the end user has not found helpful. As simple as that. And we're taking all of these different signals we've just been talking about to kind of calculate that number. That number then becomes, for most of our customers, the primary KPI for quality of their AI applications. If the number goes above 10%, to give you an example, it means 1 in 10 questions is getting a non-useful answer. And empirically, we have found it to be the case that when that happens above double digit, chances are you're going to start seeing some churn or reduced engagement because human beings, they don't find it that useful. On the contrary, if the number starts trending down, and kind of the lowest we've seen so far is with a Finnish company called Aura. They make the ring. They've done a great job with their advisor, and I think for their case, it's around 1%. So it means only one question in 100 is somehow dissatisfactory. Then you're on the right path. And the starting point sometimes can be surprisingly, bad. We've started to see chatbots that have an error rate measured this way. It can be as high as 30, 40, 50%. And this doesn't mean, this is kind of tying back to your question, it doesn't mean the application has been, the LLM doesn't work, the application is bad. It means that when it was designed, they didn't take into account the real use cases that people had in mind when using that AI solution. So typically it's not a technological problem. It's a mismatch between what the end user of that product has in mind and what your solution is able to provide. To give you like a very practical example, we're seeing a lot of HR assistants. So HR assistants, as in like you have questions, you work in a big company. Hey, how about my leave? How about my bonus? How about my pay? And very often those assistants, they've been designed with a very basic usage in mind. As in, I ask you about holidays and here's the policy about holidays. But what people end up doing is asking, hey, how many days do I actually have per year? How many have I used? And so the trick here is understanding that there is a significant amount of users that require that level of detail. And that the level of detail can be provided. It's no longer a technological problem. You just need to connect to the right DB and provide like a dynamic experience. But it's very hard to anticipate all of those needs. Now, just use an example. There were hundreds of those. And so going back to the kind of launch and an experiment kind of approach we discussed before, we think what works is building an initial version that is good enough to create some engagement, and then picking on the signals, and then working on the signals to drive down this quality metric we talked about, error rate, to as low a percentage as possible.
Makes sense. Super interesting. I saw that Iveco Group, that's a 35,000 employees company, and they have dozens of AI assistants. They are using Nebuly, and they said that it gave them 100x more actionable feedback than traditional methods. That is very bold. Can you help us understand what that actually means in practice? How can you even digest X more actionable feedback in a team?
They're one of our oldest customers, so we're very happy to have been in business with them for a couple of years now. I think they weren't getting anything wrong. They were just following the kind of traditional script, the traditional process I was talking about before. And that process for them specifically consisted in having very deep and extensive internal customer, we're talking about users, interviews. And you can only have, so many of those interviews per week. It takes, time to kind of convince somebody to accept to do the interview, and then you need to actually do the interview. And people might have forgotten what happened in the past. It's not like you remember like what went wrong with your prompt a month ago. You might remember what went wrong yesterday or today, but like over time, like as humans, we forget. We might remember it was not great or it was very good, but the specifics, which is what you need to kind of fix what doesn't work, that you tend to forget very quickly. And so what we put in place for them is our solution as it is. It's going to automatically extract from those like thousands of conversations, those situations where something went wrong, present it to you in a unified list with volumes, this many problems for this task, and so on and so forth. And as you have that list, then you can start to get to work. It's as simple as that. And I think it works across companies. Now you picked on Iveco, but it's really about the methodology here. The methodology to extract that feedback and to kind of cluster the feedback and then put it to good use. That's, I think, what makes us a little bit different versus traditional analytics. It's extracting that feedback in a kind of difficult context.
So let's make that more concrete. So for certain intents in my chatbot, the answer quality is not right based on the user feedback, right? What do I do? What can I concretely do when I want to change that and improve my chatbot's responses?
So most of the solutions we're working with us today have a very specific architecture, which is a RAG architecture, retrieve augmented generation. This has very practical implications, as in very often the problem is not the LLM, it's not the retrieval, but it's the fact that the knowledge base itself is either missing or outdated. So what can you do when you identify a problem within Nebuly? Most of the time, it's either adding knowledge to the knowledge base. You figure out that people, to my point before, they want to know how many actual days of holidays they have left. So you need to provide a tool that is pulling from your Churn software and plugging that information in the DB. Could be that you have stale information in the knowledge base. It's providing you with pricing data as of December 2024, and we are in February 2025. So what we do is picking up, hey, your salespeople are complaining that the pricing information is stale and they cannot rely on it and they have to look for it in a PDF file. So the obvious fix in that case is about updating those documents sometimes, but it's actually not that often. It's a technological problem itself. Maybe you need to use a more powerful model. Maybe you need to add some system prompts and so on and so forth. The thing what we've been consistently seeing is that, and this goes back to the 80-20 rule, 80% of the problems, they are not technologically hard to solve. So once we display to the company like a list of situations that need to be fixed, any AI team that has working knowledge of the technology can get it fixed. The real disconnect is understanding what those situations look like. And that's where we come in a way, because it feels like instead of taking a shoot in the dark, you actually have some data that help you like providing a solid product development roadmap that's grounded in real user feedback. And this is going to make your life much easier, because you can commit resources to something it's going to move the needle. So, be honest, it's more about picking up the signal than actually fixing the problem for most of the situations. And that's where I think like a lot of the value basically sits as you start scaling up the application volume.
You also work with Class Editori, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, to launch Italy's first AI-powered financial news assistant. Now, that's a customer-facing product, not an internal assistant. How does measuring external user behavior differ from measuring employee behavior?
So maybe for listeners, we're seeing like a couple kind of type of AI applications. Internal, so typical example would be a large corporate having like thousands of employees and needing to make them more productive, and external. And external applications, customer-facing application themselves, they kind of fall into buckets. There is the kind of more traditional one. Let's call it customer support, for lack of a better term. And then there is the more interesting ones, which is what we call customer engagement. And the one you just described, I think, is a great example. So Class Editori is publishing like online media. Specifically, like they have maybe for international listeners, something similar to the Financial Times, but specifically for the Italian market. So it's kind of a finance outlet. And as you can imagine, these media companies are sitting on decades and decades and decades of archives that are very not accessible to end users. If you subscribe to a newspaper today, you're going to be able to look at the newspaper, but it's going to be very hard for you to research stuff that's been published years ago, even if it's relevant to your use case. So the beauty of this new assistant is the fact that they build on proprietary information that's been kind of built up over decades and make it at the fingertip of the user. And the problem for them specifically, but I guess this applies to any company, is that they have so much information that is very hard to guess what the end user is going to ask about. So prioritization of features, understanding what's basically going to drive most of the engagement, most of the paid subscriptions, I think that's super, super important. So in a way, the kind of end goal here is not to measure. Before we discussed internal productivity, it's about measuring time savings. I think that's the bottom line, time savings and efficiency. For external applications, most of the time it's about measuring satisfaction, upgrades, sales, lack of churn, and so on and so forth. And in the context of external, I think like we had a great experience working with a large telcos. The telcos has a chatbot on the website. And it might sound like absurd to people listening to us, but if you click around on the website and you click on a promotion, hey, 20% off for your mobile plan if you're already like a Wi-Fi user at home, the company would know it right away. They track in a click on the website and they know you did it. But if that same person is asking the question within the assistant, it's much harder to pick up the signal. And so it's much easier not to action it. If your assistant is unable to convert that lead within the chat by proposing them right away to sign the plan, you might end up losing it. And on the flip side, you might have somebody coming in and complaining, hey, today my connection is awfully slow. I've been complaining with you guys for like months, and nothing changes, this is a very strong signal of potential churn. This guy's just waiting for the right occasion to kind of leave. And again, it's very hard for companies to pick up on these signals. So back to your question, for external applications, customer-facing applications, on top of everything we discussed about technical improvements of the chatbot, so we've been talking about like how to use the feedback to drive improvements of the AI application itself. There is a second layer which is just as important for us, which is getting business signals. People wanting to upgrade, people wanting to churn, people talking about competitors, people requesting a new product feature. And there is a lot of that gold sitting within those conversations that most of the time is undetected and underutilized. So part of our job is also picking up on those signals, providing them to the business so that they can act on it. How they decide to act on it, that's business decision. Following up with a potential user, providing a discount, sending an email, whatever it is, that's not our job. Our job is picking up the signal and making sure it's a reliable signal, an actionable signal, and something that the company can build on. And so that's the real difference in a way, internal versus external applications is the so what. Internal, once you get to a state where employees are very happy and you've managed to kind of improve efficiency a little bit, I think that's kind of the end goal. Anything external, on the contrary, like it's unlimited upside if you manage to kind of leverage those insights I was talking about.
Based on your personal experience working with a lot of different companies, does Nebuly show a customer that their AI project is a failure and they should kill it, or does analytics rather help you optimize product success?
Honestly, 80% of the time it's about optimization. But we've also seen cases where the solution has been shut down because it was just not viable from a business perspective. And it's not a bad thing. I think like it's there's a cycle of life. You kill something and you start something else. So I think it's a good kind of portfolio management in a way.
Absolutely. Let's get practical. I'm an AI product manager and I'm listening to this. Tomorrow morning, what would you say? What's the one thing I should check about my AI product that I'm probably not checking today?
I think the single biggest question you should ask yourself is, am I learning from my end users as much as I could, or am I making like guesses based on, gut feelings, previous experience, and so on and so forth? I think that's the number one question for a product manager, because there is a lot of gold sitting within those chats, and it's just a matter of kind of getting it out.
And how do I make sure that I can distill the right insights, right? So working with Excel only gets you that far. Maybe you need to upgrade your toolkit as well.
Yeah.
I'm super curious because you're working on like user feedback and model performance on that angle. I'm curious, what do you think in February 2026? How good are the models? How close are we to AGI? What is your current assessment of the model landscape?
So let me start by saying it's just a personal opinion. I guess asking some old one would be a much better way to go about it. But I personally feel like on a lot of tasks, AI has become incredibly good. So when I need to draft an email, when I need to tweak a piece of text, analyze a legal document, on those applications, I think it's already superhuman. So it's performing better than what a human being could do. But I feel like there were a lot of other applications where, we're still far away from having a human/superhuman performance. And I think it's not just a matter of technology; it's a matter of efficiency and cost. As an end user, for instance, I have realized that a couple of years ago, when you were asking questions to, say, ChatGPT, you would kind of see crunching data and then coming up with an answer. Now, it's very often the case that it's basically summarizing an existing piece of knowledge that you can find in the web. And this is not a technological problem. This is, an economic problem. What I mean by this is that retrieving that information from an existing piece of knowledge is computationally light extracting that information, doing deep research is extremely computational and expensive. And so what really interests me is keeping an eye on new architectures coming up. The transformer now is, I think it's 8-9 years old. Scaling those, they can be quite punishing, as in to improve significantly performance from here, model size needs to explode. And as model size explodes, costs explode and so on and so forth. So I'm quite curious, and I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'm just wondering if at some point in the next few years, with the amount of investments we're seeing that go into the AI space, we're going to see something completely new. And instead of, ChatGPT, 6, and the next version of Claude, the old transformer based, it's going to be a completely different architecture that's going to allow us to kind of make it the next improvement, basically. So I'm quite curious to see. And the second thing I'm very curious to kind of explore, and I think Jensen Wang from NVIDIA has been very vocal about it in the past 12 months, is how AI is going to be embedded in the real physical world. And this is an open problem from a technological perspective. Having robot coming and fixing your dishwasher, that's the kind of applications that would unlock a tremendous amount of economic value if you think about it. And it would also somehow rebalance what's happening today in the market, as in it's the first time ever that white collars got the hard end of the stick. People in offices are being replaced or substituted or augmented by AI. Blue collars working in the real world, so to speak, they have been hit in the past, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s with the robots and so on and so forth. But right now they feel more safe. I'm just wondering at what point we're going to see AI coming into the physical world and we start seeing a humanoid, a robot humanoid coming home and fixing your dishwasher, whatever it is. So that's the second fascinating problem that I'm very kind of curious about.
You're building AI infrastructure for an emerging industry. What are some of the unresolved problems that you see today in the AI analytics space that you're working on or that you plan to work on?
There is multiple things. It's a 25 people company right now, so we have more ideas than the manpower to kind of put it to work. But some of the obvious things we'd like to work on is understanding multimodal in a native way. What I mean by that is, picking up signals within images, signals within voice conversations, and so on and so forth. So fully multimodal. That's going to unlock further value, because back to kind of our telcos example before, if you have a chatbot, understanding if the person is having an angry tone of voice or not, I think that's quite interesting on top of what they actually say. And then the second big topic here is about being as flexible as possible about the type of insights we extract from the data. It's an open technological problem providing a sort of customized insights within, sort of pre-established guidelines, hey, this is a topic, this is a subtopic, this is a subtopic, but having customers being able to define any sort of metric that they have in mind. I think this is going to unlock even more value, because it's going to align company-specific KPIs with what we basically can provide to them, and this is something we're working toward. So kind of creating a closer fit between the type of insights we extract and what the company is really looking for within the business.
Now, you come from a finance background where every dollar gets measured. When does AI shift from this is a cool productivity boost to becoming a material line item on the P&L? When are CFOs reporting AI cost savings or AI net new revenue in earning calls?
I don't think it's ever going to happen. I mean, I've never found a CFO that provided this type of updates with, internet or mobile applications. I think it's just going to, somehow get lost in the P&L. But I think what they do believe in is the fact that CFOs are going to start kind of requiring businesses to provide internally measures. They're not going to be GAAP metrics. You cannot put it in a financial statement, but you can get a pretty good sense of what is the effective return. And we discussed before, for instance, us being able to estimate time savings and then translate it in a dollar amount. So for internal purposes, big believer that's already happening. 2024, they were we call them the years of AI experimentation. A company is playing around and spinning up things and checking how they look like. 2027 is going to be the years of the harvesting. So somebody higher up in the company is going to start asking for real results.
Absolutely. There will be more questions around the AI bubble for this year, also on the CFO side. What do you think? How would that look like now? The CFO coming more on the table when we talk about AI. It's been more like a technical or even enablement conversation with HR up to now. What do you think it's going to change?
CFOs expect results most of the time. This means generating some sort of tangible benefits that goes beyond a better user experience. So CFOs will expect to measure metrics, and if those metrics are not in place, then it's going to be a hard discussion with the product team that was responsible for that AI initiative. So we discussing these topics very openly with our customers, and we feel like we can be, of help in coming up with some of those metrics and steering the ship in the right direction before there is, some harder constraint coming in from above. What gives us a lot of confidence and as a result of this, the customers, is the fact that we know it can be done from a technological perspective. You can get the product to a situation where it generates real business value. It's a matter of iterating, listening to feedback, measuring things, moving fast. And then eventually you're going to get there. The real problem is when you think, and this really time back full circle to your initial point, that you shipped it, that's it, that's fine. It turns out it's not fine, and then it's going to get hacked.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's take a look at 2-3 years from now. When you think about AI analytics, and I think judgment is ultimately one of the key skills that are going to be needed. What kind of roles and responsibilities do you foresee for someone whose job is managing conversational AI systems? And what kind of skills and experiences are needed?
I feel like in a way, it's becoming less and less technical. Kind of thinking back about what happened in the last 5 years, GPT-3 required basically expert software knowledge to use it. And then as we kind of move forward, it's becoming more of a kind of plug and play sort of situation, low code sort of situation. So I think that, product managers are going to become increasingly less technical in a way. And then they're going to become a little bit more, I don't know how to call it, user savvy, business savvy, in terms of understanding what are the specific needs you need to solve with that problem. So it's going to be less about how do we get it done and more about what do we exactly need to get done. So that's probably my true sense on this question.
My last question. Imagine it's 2035, so 9 years from now.
Wow.
Nebuly has become the Google Analytics of AI. What will the world look like, and what will you personally spend your time on?
I hope the world will look like a lot more peaceful than it is today, regardless of Nebuly. I hope that customers all over the world will provide delightful experiences to their end users because of great AI applications. And I guess at some point I'm going to go back to climbing mountains.
Thank you so much, Julien. This has been fantastic. For listeners or watchers who want to follow your work, learn more about Nebuly, where should they go?
www.nebuly.com.
Perfect.
Thanks
everyone for listening and watching. That's it for today from AI to Go. Thank you. Bye-bye and auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you, Johannes. Auf Wiedersehen.
AI to Go podcast.